Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Top 10 players for this Clemson program heading into 2024. And Dill, right off the bat, I'm going to ask the Clemson fans, light me up in the comment section. I left a lot of good players off of this list. I learn a ton from you guys every time we talk Clemson. Let me have it in the comment section. Love talking ball with you guys. And Dill, making this top 10 list, you start to really appreciate why the boys are so high on Clemson heading into 2024. I believe we have 6 front 7 defenders in the top 10 of this Clemson team, a very talented team heading into 2024. You talk about what has been Clemson's bread and butter when they're kind of at the height of their powers. It's a dominant front 7. You look at this Clemson team, especially on the defensive side of the football, one of the best front 7s that we'll see in all of college football. Fired up to get into it. Before we do it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, to the Clemson fans. It's been a blast talking this program all off season, and the amount of support you guys continue to show to the fellas, it truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. Dill started off with one of my personal favorites, and that's Phil Mafah. And I think there's going to be a lot of casual college football fans that expect this running back room to take a step back, losing Will Shipley to the NFL. I look at Phil Mafah and say, in 2023, he was the better running back. And this is not me taking a knock at Will Shipley. I am a massive fan of Will Shipley. Some people even say that I look a little bit like Will Shipley. But you look at – it's true. People have said it. The people are talking. But you look at Phil Mafah, I think he is a guy that you're really excited to see have maybe 250 carries during this 2024 year. Phil Mafah coming in at number 10. How are we feeling about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think really what you hope for Phil Mafah to bring to this Clemson team is that ability to stay on schedule. Because you kind of said it. I mean, yeah. Will Shipley's got more explosiveness, probably a little bit more straight line speed. But there were times where it felt like, oh, we gotta pick up 4 yards here instead of 1. And I think Phil Mafah's physicality, his contact balance, the way he runs a little bit harder, not harder, but just can stay up and run through tackles a little bit more effectively. That's going to be huge for keeping them out of that third and long situation.
You look at Will Shipley, and again, I'm not taking a shot at Will Shipley. It was a little bit boom or bust, right? He had more 10-plus carries than Phil Mafah, but averaged yet less yards per carry. I think that tells you Will Shipley was a guy that there were a lot of 1st and 10 carries that went for 0 yards or 1 yard. And you're kind of looking at 2nd and 9. And you talk about giving Cade Klubnik some opportunity to kind of be aggressive. You want to stay in those quarterback-friendly down and distances. And I think Phil Mafah is a guy that probably allows you to do that a little bit more effectively. And I think Phil Mafah is going to be a guy that when you see him get 20-plus carries per game, I mean, he's a guy that's going to get stronger and stronger as the game goes on, really wear out some of those defenses. I mean, Phil Mafah is a guy you don't want to tackle 20-plus times a game. I think Clemson's going to make teams tackle him 20-plus times a game. I'm fired up about Phil Mafah. Going into number 9, Dill, we went back and forth, right? And you were leaning some other wide receivers. I would love to hear from the Clemson fans here. I went with Tyler Brown. And you look at Tyler Brown as a true freshman, led the team in receiving yards, led the team in first down catches. We all saw with our 2 eyes how good Tyler Brown can be and will be for Clemson. The thing that stood out to me is as a true freshman, extremely quarterback-friendly wide receiver, right? When targeted, a 76.5% completion percentage, only had 3 drops all year. This was an extremely dependable true freshman wide receiver with some big-time athletic juice and upside in terms of what he can do after the catch. Hey, give me Tyler Brown at number 9 here.
And this is where I kind of fall with this Clemson wide receiver core in general. Is I think Tyler Brown, you don't have really any questions about what he's going to do in terms of producing next year in the role you want him. Whether that's catching screens, being able to run after the catch. I think he's a really good runner. Maybe not like the fastest guy in the world, but good at breaking tackles, good contact balance, has a good sense of what to do with the ball when he gets it, and then work in the middle of the field as savvy as they get for a true freshman. But again, what I think, frankly, you really need from Clemson, or maybe what you frankly want to see, is one of those boundary guys work their way into being one of those top 10 guys, being one of the alpha dog players on this Clemson team. Because when I kind of look, they didn't have that last year. I think it condensed the field for them. I think the middle of the field was harder to work in. Guys like Brenningstool, who are, again, should be focal points and will be focal points this offense, makes their job harder. I think you need one of your boundary guys, whether it's one of the young kids, Wesco or more.
100%. You need some of those boundary receivers to step up because we talked about it. One of the biggest problems with that Clemson passing attack is it was outside of the top 100 in yards per pass attempt. They just struggled to push the ball down the field. And like you said, condense the middle of the field, made it harder for guys like Tyler Brown and Jake Bringenstool to operate in those short intermediate route trees. TJ Moore, Brian Wesco, whether it's Adam Randall, needs some of those guys to step up on the boundary for Clemson. Going into number 8, we're going to go with one of my personal favorites. Dabo Swinney agrees with me, Wade Woodaz. And this is a linebacker that you got to give him a ton of credit for kind of just, hey, being patient. You don't see that a lot in the college football landscape anymore. Didn't get a ton of opportunity because you were playing behind some of the best linebackers in all of college football last year. Former safety that knows how to operate in space, drop back in coverage, go sideline to sideline. Dabo Swinney's fired up for him. I'm fired up for him. I don't think a lot of people know who Wade Woodaz is. They're going to know who he is come the end of November.
Well, and that's like the people who say, "Oh, Clemson needs transfers," because they just don't they don't get it. They don't get that Clemson's kept their recruiting classes together. They don't get that guys like Wade Woodaz, DeMonte Capehart, who we'll see later. Those guys are coming up through the ranks and can really, really play. Because if you don't watch every down of Clemson football, you don't necessarily know that Wade Woodaz is great. But again, what he can do complementing Barrett Carter, where you can let him rush the passer and play a little bit more aggressively, just because Wade Woodaz, as you said, is so comfortable in space, really does a good job, whether it's zone, man, he can do everything we want as a linebacker. And again, I think he should allow Barrett Carter to really have a year.
Number 7, Avian Terrell. And this is a guy that you gave me some heat. I might be sleeping on Avian Terrell a little bit. Another true freshman. This Clemson team had multiple. You talk about why we're so high on Clemson. Yes, the front 7, but also, I mean, they had so many true freshmen that played phenomenal football for Clemson in 2023. Avian Terrell is one of those guys, and Dill, that kind of gets me thinking in this top 7. I think we're going to talk about 4 guys who were true freshmen in 2023. That's an incredible number for a Clemson team that was as good as Clemson is. You look at Avian Terrell, 47% completion percentage when targeted, extremely sticky, makes those throwing windows very tight. Now you see cornerbacks who are young, they can hold up in coverage. It's not rare, but you don't see it a ton, but you see it in Avian Terrell. But I think what really sets him apart for me, and I don't know if that totally made any sense, 8.7% missed tackle rate too. This is not only a guy that
young corners don't tackle. That's definitely, there's some truth to that.
That was kind of what I was trying to get to. And it took me 30 seconds to get that point across, trying to work on that. He tackles extremely well. And we're going to talk about some other young cornerbacks too that also tackle really well for Clemson. Avian Terrell, a guy that could certainly be a top 5 player on this Clemson team in 2024. Going to number 6, Still, I'll just let you cook on him. DeMonte Capehart, kind of your guy, coming in at number 6. How are we feeling about it?
Yeah, as I mentioned, one of those guys that, like, again, if you're not a Clemson diehard or not a real aggressive watcher of Clemson football, you could get lost because, again, those numbers aren't like crazy. They're good for the amount he played, obviously, but you've just seen some moments where he's just so hard to handle, they're so physical and so explosive. I mean, just being able to run guys into the backfield, make plays. I think he's going to have a huge year because, again, when you have that athleticism and that explosiveness, you can rush the pass really well. You can make plays in the backfield effectively. I mean, again, if you weren't watching, you maybe don't know about him, but I mean, he had moments where I was like, well, this guy he's more dominant than some of those guys like Tyler Davis. Like, he just has a little bit more juice in his game.
He's not a guy that you can appreciate what he brings to Clemson's defense through a box score. You know, like, again, 15 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, solid numbers for the amount he played. This is a guy that when he's on the field, he's extremely disruptive, takes on double teams extremely well. I think DeMonte Capehart is an absolute stud. And Bill, that makes me think, I mean, I left Peyton Page off this list. He's another guy that can be an all-ACC kind of guy for Clemson on the defensive line. Take a look at our top 5 here. We're going to go with Khalil Barnes. Now, I am a massive fan of Khalil Barnes for a couple of different reasons. One, I think nickel corners get so much disrespect. Like, people talk about them like they're like the ugly stepchild, right? Like, oh yeah, if you can't play boundary, go play nickel. It is such an important position in this landscape of college football, right? When you can have a guy in Khalil Barnes who can deal with slot tight ends, those jumbo wide receivers, some of those smaller slot wide receivers, be extremely sticky, come up in the box and tackle. You take a look at Khalil Barnes as a true freshman. led the team with 3 interceptions, 6 pass breakups on the year, 5.5 tackles for a loss, only 10.5% missed tackle rate. This is another young cat for Clemson that can do a ton of different things and really gives you, that chess piece in the Clemson defense that can do so many different things. Give me Khalil Barnes as a top 5 player for this Clemson
Clemson team that wants to play the amount of man they play, you really need to have a tackle. That's when it's really important because, again, when you don't have that guy who can play deal with dudes in the middle, you just can get exposed. It's too easy to complete passes there. I just thought the amount they put on his plate, whether he's playing safety, nickel, wherever he lined up, always shined, played really good football in tackles. I just think, again, there's not really a hole in his game, and that's a big part of being a really good nickel corner.
And when you're trying to get just more coverage ability on the field, right, because you're seeing a lot of teams run 4 wide receivers, and also having a guy that can play in the box, he can give you that coverage ability. You see that on the screen, but also be a guy that can be forceful in the run game. As a true freshman last year, extremely impressive from a guy like Khalil Barnes, getting into our top 4. Number 4, Jake Bringenstool. I think this is one of the best tight ends in the country. We kind of mentioned it earlier, so we'll go kind of quickly through this. He led the team with 5 touchdowns. He led the team in targets, 38 catches between the numbers. Jake Bringenstool is just a matchup nightmare. This is a guy that if you want to put a safety on him or a nickel back on him, he is going to just be bigger and stronger and make those contested catches. You want to throw a bigger guy on him like a linebacker, he's going to run right by you. And you kind of mentioned it with the emergence of potentially TJ Moore, Adam Randall, or Bryant Wesco on the boundary, having legit threats on the boundary. That's going to open up the field for a guy like Jake Bringenstool, a guy that
it can put him in positions on good matchups. Right? Yes. Again, last year, just when you don't have the boundary threat, he had to earn those 500 yards. That was not the way Brock Bowers had necessarily doing. Brock Bowers is a freak. I'm not taking a shot at him, but Brock Bowers had other guys around him who could do some damage, who could work on the boundary. I just think Bringenstool, again, was so much the focal point to an extent of what they were doing offensively. Those 500 yards, again, does that look crazy good in the stat sheet? Not necessarily, but he had to work so hard for it. He had to make huge plays, catching traffic, make plays after the catch, and he's got all that in him. I just think, again, if they can expand this wide or pass catcher unit a little more, he can have, I think he have 800, 900 yards.
Another thing for Jake Bringenstool is what he does in the red zone. Again, led the team with 5 touchdown passes. You look at Clemson, dreadful in the red zone last year. And a lot of that had to just do with some foolish turnovers and some unlucky type stuff. You look at Jake Bringenstool, this guy is just an absolute animal in the red zone. When those throwing windows get kind of small, you have just a big body target that can go up and make plays. I'm a massive fan of Jake Bringenstool. Going into our top 3 of Dill, we're going to talk about 2 true freshmen from last year, which is absolutely insane to talk about. Let's start with TJ Parker. Now, if you wanted to make the argument that TJ Parker is the best player on this Clemson team, I would not argue with you one bit. You look at what he did, again, as a true freshman, 12.5 tackles for a loss, 5 sacks. We all know what he could do as a pass rusher, right? 5 sacks, 22 quarterback hurries. That was second on the team. You see sometimes that from true freshmen, guys who are just kind of athletic freaks that have a ton of juice coming off the edge. TJ Parker certainly falls under that category. What he did against the run, you don't see freshmen come into the line of scrimmage at the Power 5 level and dominate like TJ Parker did. 3rd on the team with 18 run stops, an average depth of tackle in the run game of 0.5 yards down the field. He stands up double teams. He gets off blocks. He keeps his outside shoulder free. This is an all-around complete edge rusher for Clemson, a guy that, you make no mistake about it, it's an All-American candidate in 2024.
And his ability to physically impose his will, I'm kind of with you, set him apart from a lot of, again, you see those freaky athlete pass rushers who can, bring them in on 3rd down, let them go to work. They're athletic enough to immediately make an impact, but his ability to play every down, play a lot of snaps, it felt like, and just be able to impose his will physically, I think sets him apart. I think it makes him more complete than a lot of young players. And you just continue to build that out. You're just looking at a defensive end who, again, is kind of what you want to see at this point in football.
Number 2, Peter Woods. I went with Peter Woods over TJ Parker. A lot of people look at the box score and say, all right, buddy had only 26 tackles, 2.5 tackles for a loss, 0 sacks. It's not necessarily the most impressive stat sheet for Peter Woods. You turn on the film and say 18 quarterback hurries from the inside of the defensive line. That was 3rd on the team, a 16% pass rush win rate 20 run stops. That was second on the team. Again, you look at Peter Woods and say, not only from an athletic standpoint, you just saw so many interior offensive linemen struggle to deal with his athleticism, but also kind of like we talked about TJ Parker, the physicality at the point of attack. That is massive for a guy like Peter Woods as a true freshman, and he's going to be playing a lot of edge rusher in 2024. And I think that's going to give him some more opportunity to kind of fill up that stat sheet. Like I think we know we kind of heading into that into the fall, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, if you just watch him, like you just know how athletic he is, how disruptive he can be. I don't think there's any doubt he's going to be a top 3 player. Frankly, I think you could stack those top 3 any way you want, and you wouldn't be wrong in my mind. Because again, you obviously get to Barrett Carter at number 1. I mean, they're all such freak shows. These two, obviously, as young guys, just the way they were playing, Peter Woods and TJ Parker. But I don't have any argument for Barrett Carter being not number 1 personally. I think a lot of people are talking about him like, oh, he had a bad season or a down year. He should have gone to the draft. I mean, when you turn the tape on, again, the numbers maybe weren't crazy, although they are very good. I mean, to have 9.5 tackles for a loss and 3.5 sacks, that's a big year. Maybe you want to see a few more tackles, frankly. But just watching him play, he can do everything. I mean, the way he can cover running backs out of the backfield, run with tight ends. When he's blitzing and getting after quarterbacks, I think that's where he's really shining, which is why I think Wade Woodez can really help him out. I mean, he just does it all. I think he's
there was not. I just echo what you said. Barrett Carter, absolute stud, best player. I mean, you could argue Peter Woods, TJ Parker, best players on this team, but I think Barrett Carter is probably the most athletic linebacker in the country. Now, I was doing a little homework assignment while you were rambling on about Barrett Carter. Dill, the true freshman that we talked about, we had one Tyler Brown, TJ Parker, Peter Woods, Khalil Barnes, Avian Terrell. We left off a guy like Sheldon Lewis. You're talking about some of the best players on this Clemson team. A lot of them are only going into their second year. So not only do you expect them to just get better going into their second year, having their first full offseason with this Clemson program, but then you look at, some of the guys coming in who are going to be true freshmen and say there is a strong argument that Sammy Brown could be a top 10 player on this Clemson roster, or a guy like Brian Wesco, or a guy like TJ Moore. People like to say, oh, Clemson's going in the wrong direction. And yeah, it's not been the Clemson standard the last 2 years. You make no mistake about that. The young talent on this team is absolutely incredible. Heading into the next couple of years, we'll close it out on that. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk.